Thank you. Thank you. Am I on? Are we on?
Can you hear us?
Hello.
Sound good to everybody?
Does it sound good?
So far?
Yeah. Wow, hi. It's nice to see you from the front. If I can get in the chair. I'm short. I need a ladder. Okay, how's that? Before we officially get started, I really want to thank Kim Toll for doing this. Thank you, Kim. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. It was beautiful. And I also want to explain part of how this came about is I skulk around in this library and don't look this good. And Kim realized who I was and came up to me one day and said, "You have a new book coming out. Will you do an event with us?" And I was like, oh gosh, but then everyone will know who I am. And she said, well, we'll just for this one night, they'll know who you are, and then we'll make sure they forget. So forget after tonight that, you know, if you see me here, just ignore me. Just ignore me. Because I'll probably be, you know, in my mind and need to focus on that. So, but I really have to thank Kim, and I also have to thank the people from Mobius New Media who are going to be filming us as part of an in Wilmington arts larger program that they're doing. And they want to be highlighting all the arts, including the literary arts. So I have said enough, and it's time for Rita Landgraf to get going.
Well, you haven't said enough. The whole idea is to get you to talk more about this wonderful book that you now have. And I think, Rachel, when I first met you, we actually were talking about riding the bus with my sister, and what a great book that was, that indeed we heard turned into the Hallmark Hall of Fame movie. How many here saw that movie? Wasn't it fantastic? It deserves an applause, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I was absolutely thrilled to learn that you had another book coming out that focuses on the lives of individuals with intellectual disabilities. And I believe the story of Beautiful Girl does indeed give us that perspective. And you're such a gifted author, and we're very fortunate that you live here in Delaware. Since Riding the Bus with My Sister came out, you have been speaking around the country to various groups, and especially to individuals with disabilities. What have you learned from the people you meet at these events? And has there been anything in particular that assisted you and led you to this new book?
Yes, that's a wonderful question, and a great way to start this off. Maybe I should provide a little bit of background on Riding the Bus with My Sister, just in case there's a few people here who have no idea what I'm talking about. I have a sister named Beth. Beth prefers to be called Cool Beth, or sometimes Chatty Beth. My sister Beth has an intellectual disability, and she's 11 months younger than I am. So we're 1 month a year, we're twins, and we're actually a week away from that 1 month. So we're very close to being both 51 at the same time. And so since I have had consciousness, Beth has been there and in my world, and it's about as close to being a person with a disability, I think, as you can be without being a person with a disability. When my sister grew up and was no longer living with the family, she developed an unusual passion of riding city buses all the time, from 6 in the morning till 6 at night, 6 days a week. And she would ride on Sundays, except the buses in her city don't run on Sundays. And I had a lot of problems with this, and the family had a lot of problems with this, and it was not the life we had in mind for her. I was led into riding the buses with her for a year, not every day. I am not a saint. And chronicling that year, and over the course of that year, got to know her better and got to know her boyfriend and her aides and the bus drivers. And Riding the Bus came out of that. And led to me doing public speaking, and then the movie happened, which led to me doing more public speaking. So now we get to the public speaking part of it. So when I do these talks, there's this wonderful thing that happens when you write a memoir that nobody talks about. The contemporary memoir is often maligned by critics, and they think of it as something that people use as a way to complain and tell their sob stories and stuff. But one of the great things that comes out of a memoir is people read it and feel empowered to disclose to you, the author, because you have laid yourself bare. And so when I go around the country, people tell me their stories, and in a very unrestrained way, and very emotionally. And so people came up to me after my talks, and often in tears, and would tell me about their lives. My sister was raised with the family. My parents were very opposed to institutions, and part of why they were opposed to institutions, I touch on at the very end of this book in the afterword. My father, of all things, grew up in an orphanage. So my father grew up in an institutionalized setting and really hated it and would talk to us about it when we were growing up. And he had this line he would say, which is, when you live in an institution, even if someone comes to visit you, which his father did after he put him there, you know at the bottom of your heart that you're not really loved. And so no child of mine will live in an institution. And so my sister was raised at home. But when I was traveling around, and still am, people whose parents had made a different decision would come up to me and talk about that. And it was shocking and sad and eye-opening. And I started to think, these are stories that need to be told. And I would also hear from family members and staff who had worked in these places. And even so, I wasn't planning to write this book, but it did start to settle in like sand at the bottom of the sea. And it needed something more to stir it up. And there were two other things that then stirred it up. The next thing, after one of my talks, it was in Illinois, I had a few minutes before my ride was going to come to take me to the airport, and I decided I would browse the vendor tables and just look for something to idle away the moments. And I came across a book that, sometimes you come across a book that changes your life. And this book jumped out at me, and it had this photograph on the cover of an African-American teenager. And I should add, for those of you who don't know, in riding the bus with my sister, like me, is white, and her boyfriend, long-term boyfriend since 1989, is African-American, Jesse. And Jesse's very much a part of my life and my sister's life, of course. So I see this photograph of this man, and the title of the book is God Knows His Name, The True Story of John Doe, number 24. And I thought, oh, what is this? What could this possibly be? And I flipped the book over, and on the back of the book, I read, in 1945, an African-American deaf teenager was found wandering the streets in Illinois, and no one knew who he belonged to, and they didn't understand his signs. And rather than take him to a nearby school for the deaf or advertise that a boy was found missing, they labeled him feeble-minded and threw him in a nearby institution for people with intellectual disabilities. And he was there for 50 years until he died, which is utterly devastating. But then a series of miracles happened. One is, amazingly, the New York Times found out about his death and wrote an obituary about him and how he had died and no one knew who he was. And then the singer-songwriter Mary Chapin Carpenter came across this obituary and was so moved by it, she wrote a song called John Doe number 24, and you can hear that. You can listen to it, look it up online. And then this reporter named Dave Bakke was so moved by this song, he thought, I must research this man's life. And he lived in Illinois. And so he set about speaking to anybody who was still alive who had worked with this man and constructed this man's life as best he could. And that was the book I was holding in my hand. And so, yes, and so I bought it and read it on the plane and bawled my eyes out. And this man moved inside me, because no one, God knows his name, no one ever knew who he was. And how much did race play a part of the whole story? And of course, because I know my brother-in-law and I know his story, I know everything gets further complicated when you have layers and layers of discrimination. So I was very moved by it. And even so, I still wasn't planning to write this book. And then I had, a year later, I had a job I really loved, teaching writing, and my department restructured me out. And if you've been through that, you know it is devastating, and I was very sad. And I thought, maybe I shouldn't go into the working world for a little while. Hasn't done well by me. Maybe I should write my way out of this, which is always my solution. And so I sat down with a pen and a pad, which is what I do, and I just put the pen down, and there is the opening of the book, and I just started writing the book. And at the very opening of the book, we're with this retired widowed school teacher who's in touch with her former students, as I was, and it's a dark and stormy night, and a knock comes to her door, and she opens the door, and I thought, who's at the door? And then I realized, oh, I've wanted to write this institution novel, and wow, maybe this could be it. And who will be there? Oh, it'll be someone like my sister, and who's she with? She's with number 24. And I flipped the numbers around, and I made him 42. And I realized they had escaped with her newborn baby. And I just started to see this whole book. And then I wrote it for the next year and a half in solitude. One friend knew I was working on it. My husband, who's in this room, did not. And nobody else. And I put out another book in the meantime, and everybody thought that's what I was focused on. But they were wrong. This was the thing that I was inside of, and I would sit down and write it every day and just cry. And those of you who've read the book know why I'm saying that. So that's where it came from.
So you actually wrote 2 books at the same time?
Oh, you know, that makes me sound superhuman. Let us put it this way. I wrote a first draft of one and a revision of another at the same time. That sounds better, doesn't it?
Well, I think the loss of you at that workplace where you were teaching writing is actually the gain to all of us.
Thank you.
Would you all agree?
Thank you.
To be able to share your gift and the ability to write 2 books at the same time, and what marvelous books you do author. You are a great storyteller.
Thank you.
And in the story of Beautiful Girl, you cover very much in this book, and about institutions, about community living, about self-determination for all individuals who find themselves disenfranchised. You touch communication differences, but how that doesn't limit people to communicate. You talk about the role of staff and family, romance, spirituality, yet the reader gets so caught up in the emotions of the story and the characters, it never feels as though you are trying to teach us something. Can you tell us more about the research that you did as the background for the book, and how you wove that so seamlessly into the story?
Oh, wow. Well, when I was teaching, I had a line I would say to my students, which is story overall. You know, the story comes first. The story has to, in fact, one of the rules I would say to the students is what you want from your reader is to keep them up all night. Like, that's what you want to do to your reader. So people have been posting on Facebook saying, I hate you. I'm so tired. I couldn't go to bed. And I'm like, great, I accomplished it. So it was always the story driving it, and part of that is the characters. And I should add, for those who haven't cracked the book yet, it's told in 4 points of view, and I keep moving from one point of view to the other. So you have Beautiful Girl, the man, number 42, the widow, Martha, who's at the beginning of the story, and then a staff worker named Kate. And you get all their points of view, and they're all quite different.
And Rachel, share with the audience what you and I talked about relative to
how I did that.
How you did that, and also from your own experience as a sibling.
Okay. There's so many aspects to being a sibling that I think people don't ever think about if they're not siblings. And one aspect is you are a go-between person. So you are the person your sibling speaks to, and you're the person your parents speak to, and sometimes they're speaking about the same situation, but they're not agreeing with each other. And you can see both sides, or in dealing with teachers or professionals and your sibling, and you're a translator between these worlds. And to do that fairly, you really have to be able to see both sides fairly. And I think as a result of that, I can see all sides of a situation and see them equally, and I don't have to say this is the only one. So to switch back and forth with point of view was actually remarkably easy for me with this book, and so much fun to do. And I really don't think I could have done that if I weren't a sibling. So that's what we talked about earlier. In terms of the research, and I just don't want to lose that thread, I did a huge amount of research. part of it was speaking to people. I contacted people who had worked in institutions, asked them for people I could interview. I spoke with people in my talks when I would have time at the end of the talk if they had lived in an institution to tell me about it. I read books about it. I watched films. And that was the institution part, but there's a lot of other research I had to do involving certain things like deafness and the African American experience, particularly in the South for people who were deaf, how literacy is tied in with that. Communication issues. There's someone I noticed in this room who spent 5 hours with me on Labor Day, the first year I was working on the book, talking through the communication issues in the story. And I should explain again for people who haven't cracked the book at all. Beautiful girl is selectively mute due to a trauma. That means she has chosen not to speak, and she has stopped having the ability to speak as a result of lack of use. So she has been communicating for several years through artwork, and she draws. Her staff person, Kate, at the institution recognizes she has this gift and cultivates it secretly, knowing it would be not approved of to do publicly, and brings her into her office and helps her with her artwork and shows her how to use artwork to tell a story. And that is largely how things get communicated. The man also doesn't speak and communicates by way of sign. So how to get these people to communicate with each other and the larger world was something I worked out with that person. There's also another person in this room who helped me with some details of using wheelchairs, which is key for a certain section of the book that you and I haven't touched on whatsoever, and I didn't have that much experience with. So we spent many, many hours on, I think it was Christmas Eve one year, going through things in incredible detail to make sure I got it right. Because what you don't want is, you know, I'm sure we've all had this where you're reading a book and you're, you know, having a good time and you hit a detail that is just so wrong that it makes you feel suspicious of everything else in the book. And I just couldn't let that happen with this book. It was just too important to me.
Tell me then how you see society has evolved relative to how we talk about people with disabilities, how we think about people with disabilities, and have you seen an evolution, or do you believe that, similar to in Beautiful Girl, that that may still be happening today?
Well, it is still happening today. Institutions are still open. In fact, we have some here.
A few in my department.
Yes. There's only, I think, a dozen states in this country where they've all closed. So institutions are still a reality. The conditions tend to be somewhat better, but it's still a reality. You know, this is not ancient history. The story starts in 1968. This is not ancient history. That said, I do think that there have been incredible developments. One is inclusion. It's just expected now that people with disabilities will live in the community, will go maybe have a job or try to have a job, maybe go shopping if they have the ability to do that, and not have people, you know, stare at them and that kind of thing. That said, of course, there's still abuse that happens, and there's still incredible bullying and all kinds of things that happen. So we have made a lot of progress. We have so much more progress to make, so much more progress to make. But I think one of the major things that's happened is really what riding the bus is about. Is that, yeah, all right, my sister rides the buses all the time, and I don't particularly like that. And tough noogies, it's not my life, it's her life. And for me to come and realize that relates to a term you used earlier, self-determination, and that's what I learned during the course of that year with her, is that this major civil rights development called self-determination had happened over the course of my sister's and my life, which says that she has a right to make her own choices about her own life. And that's very radical if you think about in 1968, you know, which was, in fact, the height of institutionalization. There were 283 in the country at that time, and there were almost 250,000 people in them. It's true. So I do think that's a really major thing, but unfortunately it's not applied in quite as universal a way as it ought to be.
Now you did talk a little bit about the original number 42 and John Doe being the 24, and how you utilized that to capture in the story of beautiful girl and one of the main characters. Were any of the main characters pulled from real life? And do you want to talk a little bit about that, how you established the characters within the book?
Let's see what I'm willing to say publicly. I can talk a little bit about the character of Doreen. A friend of mine who knows my sister said, "Isn't Doreen kind of like your sister?" Doreen's very outspoken. Doreen is Beautiful Girl's best friend, and she's very outspoken. And she has Down syndrome and was put in the institution when she was a week old. Her parents were famous and never went and visited her. I will not elaborate on who they were. And she wasn't a she, but she is derived from a historical figure. Hannah, who is the sister of Beautiful Girl, who I really like the Hannah character. Hannah isn't particularly based on anyone except for her name. There's this wonderful advocate I know named Hannah Jacobs, who has a child with a disability and became very aware of the use of the R word, which I'm not going to say, but people know the word I mean, and has devoted her life to trying to get people to stop using it. And she will go after any famous person and go to their agent and pick at their house. And I mean, and she's actually married to a very well-placed person in media, so she actually has access to a lot of these people. And I just wanted to honor her, so I used her name. Let me think of who else I might have. Oh, well, there's a lot of side characters who came from some of my research. Some of the people I spoke to who had worked in institutions told me about some of the people they had worked with, and they made their way into the book, some of the individuals they'd worked with. In fact, someone who's already read the book said, "I know that guy. His name was Howard. I can show you a picture of him." Yeah, so I mean, the things I'm writing about are real. There's a detail in the book that a lot of people have brought up. It's funny, it's this one detail everybody focuses on, which is that one of the things Linny that crosses her mind in being in the institution is the fact that everyone in her building uses the same toothbrush, one toothbrush. And you know, when you're not funding places, what are people going to do, right? That is not a detail I made up. That's true. There's another detail that I think I have in there that nobody actually has mentioned, but she hasn't worn a bra. And the reason she hasn't worn a bra is that the state did not approve funding for brassieres for the women who lived in these places, but they approved funding to fix the hole in the barn roof. And this is for real. This is real stuff. So the details are real, the characters are invented, and even though my number 42 is derived from number 24, of course he is a fictional character. And I love him.
He's a great character. Can we talk a little bit about Martha?
Martha.
And how did you come about Martha, and how you portray that her grown students still come back to her at least one time a year, but how she could rely on those students to assist her in a certain situation?
Yeah. Ooh. Well, I think Martha was the first character came to me in that first day when I sat down, and of course I just lost my job, so I think that's kind of a, teaching. And I had gotten in touch with my former students, with my suddenly former students, and had said, the situation has changed and I will not be back in the fall, and I'm sad about this. And they were very upset. And so I secretly said to them, I'll say this publicly, while you're still enrolled in school, if you want to keep studying with me, I will keep studying with you. Except I'm not 70.
No.
Not yet. I'm 51. Yeah. No, but with but I want to add one other thing about Martha, which is when I was growing up, I loved fairy tales, and I read them and reread them and reread them and reread them. And there are two key age groups in fairy tales. There's the young girl, like beautiful girl, and there's the old lady. And so when I write fiction, I just am always drawn to young girls and old ladies.
Also, Martha's a nice old lady. Some
Well,
of those fairy tales
it's
have
true.
those other old ladies.
But then you have fairy godmothers, you know,
That's
you
true.
do get the good witches, you know.
So I see you as the good witch.
Well, thank you.
And that's interesting also about the analogy with what you went through during that time, but also the gift that you were going to continue to give to your students, as Martha gave such a tremendous gift to her students, but when she needed that level of support, they were all there to support her. Now let's talk a little bit about Kate.
Oh, Kate.
Kate, because I know you also were very focused not that long ago on looking at direct service professionals and how to better support those who support individuals with disabilities. And as I read the book and thought about Kate, I thought that what Kate was a terrific example of individuals who support individuals with disabilities. Can you talk more about not only Kate's character, but also as you travel across the country and see the direct service professionals and what that resonates for you?
Oh, boy. Yeah, and I should clarify a little bit. Let's see, after the movie came out, after Riding the Bus came out in 2005, I got very involved with an organization called Anchor, which is a trade association of agencies that provide direct support professionals. So in my sister's world, we call these people her aides. So that's the overall term you can think of, but direct support professional, direct care worker, there's a range of terms, and the basic idea is somebody who is at the side of a person with disabilities to help them with what they need, which in my sister's case is fairly light, what she needs, but in some people's case might be 24-hour care of some sort or another. And the thing with my sister as I entered her life more was recognizing, oh, there are these people around her and they're part of her life and they might be closer to her than family. So when I started traveling around the country, I started to see this more and more, and that family sometimes drops out of the picture for one reason or another, but the direct care worker needs to be there. And who are these people? And why do they do this? So I started doing this side project of interviewing people, and I collected a lot of their stories, and that led to the talk that where you and I last saw. Was that the last time we saw each other? And I called that talk Beyond the Job Description, because these were people where there's the job description. You change the diapers, you teach somebody how to cook, or you make sure they know how to use a bank account or whatever. But the people who are really committed to it go so far beyond that and do so much more. And part of it is just seeing the person really as an individual and not just somebody to be serviced. So for instance, just a really simple example, a friend of mine who I knew completely separately from the disability world entered that profession and started calling me up. She said, wow, there's this whole parallel universe I never even knew about. I'm like, welcome, nice to have you here. And and what she discovered was she was working with someone who was nonverbal, very smart, nonverbal, used a wheelchair, and that there were staff who would decide it was time for this woman to take a shower and would just hose her down. And my friend came and she would say, do you want to take a shower tonight? Let's try out the water temperature on you. Do you want it warmer? And talk to her just as a person. And my sister, I asked her for a list of what she would want her direct care workers to do, and that's how I ended that talk. And everything on the list had to do with what you or I would want. And like a really simple example is if you're my aide and you're going to be late coming to see me, call. It seems sort of self-evident, but this doesn't necessarily happen. But then there are the people who do it and who are really dedicated to it, and they are totally unsung heroes, and nobody talks about them. And we must talk about them, and now we have the politics, and now I have to bring in some politics, because we have a severe labor shortage for these people. And if we're going to actually have people not live in institutions and live in the community, we have to be paying these people fair wages so that we can retain them, so we have good people doing this work, because there are good people doing this work, and we need to keep them. Most of the people who've worked with my sister have been fabulous. There was one who came and said to me, I went to meet her, and she said, "Oh, you don't need to meet me. I'm looking for another job." And this was like a week after she'd gotten there. And then there was someone else who said to me, I said, "What led you to do this?" And he said, "Well, let me put it to you this way. I just bought a new car." And I couldn't figure out what he was saying. And then I realized, like, I said, "Oh, you mean you need to make car payments, and that's why you're in this job?" You know, like, can I start strangling you now? You know, it's so, anyway, these are not the good people. But my sister has had many good people, and I just wanted to write about these people. A lot of them also have spiritual cores, and are very tied in with this as part of a spiritual journey that they're on. And so that's part of why Kate is very Catholic, and it's part of what she does. But actually, that brings me to the whole spiritual thing in the book. Yeah.
Very nice segue.
Thank you. There are people who miss the spiritual context of the book. We haven't even gotten into the whole publishing thing that's going on with this book, but the publisher sent me on a tour before the book came out, which is incredibly rare, like almost never happens. And they sent me around the country in Canada to meet influential booksellers to talk up the book before the book came out at these fancy schmancy dinners. And so I'd be at these dinners, you know, eating too many calories. And people would ask me questions about the book. And I remember somebody saying to me, "What's all this God stuff in the book? There's like so much God stuff in the book." And the rest of the table said, "What are you talking about?" And he looked at them and he said, "How could you have missed this?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" So I think it depends on your perspective as you go into the book. But one of the things that I've long felt is there's two taboos. Right. What are you talking about? There's two taboos, two big taboos with people with disabilities. One is sexuality, which we haven't touched on at all yet. And the other is spirituality. And nobody talks about that. And when I say that, what I mean is there seems to be this misimpression that people with disabilities don't think about God and don't wonder about God and don't pray or decide to stop praying, don't have their own spiritual path. And anybody who's dealt with disabilities, you know that society is imposing spiritual stuff on you. There's the, you know, "Oh, they're God's true children" thing, which, you know, made me homicidal when I was a kid. And I shouldn't keep saying that, should I? It's very bad. So there's that, and there's, you know, "Oh, God only chooses the good ones to give them." Or, "You had this child with a disability because you sinned." Or, as someone who worked with my father told him after Beth was diagnosed, we are Jewish, "This is just your cross to bear." Seriously. So there's all of these layers of things, and then people feeling disaffected from their faith community because the community isn't supportive, or they can't bring the child to services because you can't get the wheelchair up the church steps, or, you know, whatever it is. And it's so much a part of the experience that I just would have been remiss not bringing it in. So each character has a different spiritual path, and they're not stagnant. They do proceed through these paths over the course of the book. And people are particularly drawn to the one that the man character is on, number 42 is on. But I don't want to elaborate on that. I want to leave that for people to find themselves.
Did you want to talk at all about that part of the book, curing?
Oh, okay. Wow, nobody has asked me that yet. Okay, so there's a transition that seems to happen when people enter the disability rights movement. Before people enter the disability rights movement, and I can't say I was born into it, I transitioned in, there is this general belief in society that people with disabilities should be fixed, should be cured. And in the disability rights movement, they contemptuously call it curism. And as a result of that, there are some people who the community at large thinks are advocates who, in fact, the disability rights movement they're not supportive of. And you can think of who some of these people might be. They're people with disabilities who are strongly pushing for cures. And in the disability rights movement, there's instead this sense of, but this is part of my identity, this is who I am, I would be a very different person if I weren't this way. And in fact, some of you may know my good friend Dan Gottlieb. And Dan Gottlieb, for those of you who don't know, he runs a radio program, WHYY. He became a quadriplegic 30 years ago in a car accident. And his first 5 years, he felt like a broken man, and he was very depressed, and kept thinking about who he'd been and how to become that person again. And then he transitioned, and he accepted who he was, and he felt, I have a much better life now, and I like myself better, and if a cure came along, I would not want it. And felt very strongly about that. And I know many people with disabilities who feel that way, and I think if you asked my sister, you know, if you could have a cure and not have an intellectual disability, first of all, she'd think you were out of your mind, because there's nothing wrong with her. There's nothing wrong with her. Is something wrong with you that you would think that? And also, it's who she is. It's just who she is. So there is a sequence in the book that where I really wanted to confront that. I really wanted to confront that. And there's a larger reason for that, which is stories about people with disabilities throughout history have fallen into certain miserable categories. And one is the cure story. And cure stories, I don't want to malign fairy tales by calling them fairy tales, because fairy tales are wonderful things. And cure stories are for the most part false things. And they're saying, it's sort of like saying, oh, all right, let's write about gay people, or let's write about African Americans, and the storyline needs to be that they need to become white, or they need to become straight. I mean, we would look at this and go, that's ridiculous. Why is that the only story you can tell? And it's certainly not the only story you can tell about a person with a disability. And it's not like people with disabilities sit around and go, I want to be cured. I'm so depressed. I want to be like everyone else. You know, no. That's not the truth. But there are these other sort of standard storylines of, and I hope people can forgive me for appropriating the term, the supercrip story of the blind man who climbs Mount Everest, and as opposed to just the person who gets on a bus and goes to work, or gets on a bus and doesn't go to work. Speaking, yes. So there's, or the wise person, and very often the person who is the catalyst for other people in the story to be the heroes or realize something about themselves. And very often the person with the disability dies at the end of the story and comes to a tragic end. So, you know, if you think about like the books I read growing up, where I'd be like, oh, finally a character like my sister. Oh, he gets killed by his best friend. You know, or, oh, and a character like my, oh, you know, and now he's dumb, and his mouse dies, and he's sad. And, you know, just like over and over and over. And, well, gosh, why does it have to be that way? I mean, my sister is really happy, you know, like, why does it have to be that way? So so directly dealing with the fallacy of the cure story and dispensing with it partway through the book was important to me. But I have to add, this sounds like I actually thought about that. I didn't. Story first. Okay. So it was the story first, and then me realizing, hey, look at the opportunity I've given myself. Good, I can do that.
But how do you think Sam felt when he was confronted by that?
I think he was outraged.
And how did he find support?
How can I answer this without giving away too much of the story? He found an ally. He found an ally. He found community in the disability world.
Which typically happens.
Which typically happens.
World.
It does.
Publisher Weekly calls the novel an enthralling love story. Do you agree?
Yes, I do.
Is that what it is first for you?
A love story, yes. Yeah, it is. And I think the publisher was initially drawn to the love story between Beautiful Girl and Number 42, which is, I love that love story. And it makes me cry, and I think about it all the time. But it's also a love story among all the characters. Linny loves her sister, and her sister loves her. And Kate loves Linny. And Number 42 Homan loves Sam. And I can go on and on. Martha loves her students love Martha, Julia loves Martha. And then Pete, who we haven't even mentioned, Pete comes into the story and he loves Julia. And, you know, so it's really just a story of love and people trying to do the right thing.
Very good. Now, you take the reader on such an emotional journey. What was the emotional journey for you like?
Ugh. Well, it was I don't want to say complicated by, it was made purer by the fact that no one knew I was doing it. I was in this bubble.
Right?
Yeah.
Is this the first time that you have written?
In isolation?
Uh-huh.
No, that's what I do. I know it sounds shocking, but...
But even your husband, is this the first novel that you wrote that your husband wasn't aware that you were writing?
Do you want to answer that?
Yes.
It's first novel.
Yeah, first novel.
Yeah. But I've certainly written a lot of other things.
Did you know she was up to something?
Yes.
You just didn't know what it was?
Yes.
We have code, and the code is generally, so what'd you do today? Stuff.
And this, of course, was after you renovated the house.
I do want to paint myself as a saint for a few
Go. Do it.
Absolutely.
I could have walked in and started reading the laptop screen.
Or the pad.
Or turned over the pad.
Were you tempted?
Or done any number of other little things like that.
Wicked would be the word. So, and she was wondering, were you tempted?
Yeah, were you tempted though?
No.
No?
Because I know how precious the space is. It's required to do something.
There's a love story here.
There is. In fact, if you know our story, it has an additional resonance in this book. I can't say too much more about that. It's true.
Now everybody open your book. Well, speaking of your emotional journey and yours, how vulnerable, how open does a writer have to be to take a reader on such a journey that can be filled with so many tears but also with hope?
I think you have to be completely at one with your story. I think you have to be completely enveloped by it. There's a line, one of these writer's lines, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. So if you're writing a sad scene and you're not crying, the reader will not cry. And if you're writing a sad scene and you're just like, and the tears are just pouring down, which happened a lot when I was doing this, then you're in a pretty good position for the reader to be doing that as well. And the same goes for humor, and the same goes for hope or suspense. If you're not at one with the material, if you don't lose your body and your sense of time, and just because you are this world, it's not really going to work that fully. There's going to be a distance, which isn't to say it's not going to work for some readers, but that's not the kind of reader I am, and it's not the kind of reader I'm aiming for. I'm aiming for someone who wants to fully enter this dream with me and be surrounded by it and have this very full, rich, deep experience where they feel all their feelings and then come out on the other side in some transformed way.
Very powerful, isn't it? Now, do you have one favorite character in this book?
I hesitate to say, because I've had so many people say to me, oh, I really, I love Martha. Like, I have a friend who's in her 70s, in fact, and she said, I love Martha. And I said, really, why? She said, I want someone to leave a baby on my doorstep. I really do. And then my literary agent really loved Beautiful Girl. But I have to say, in the subtitles that run underneath everything else I'm doing, maybe that's a better way to put it, when my mind goes to that other place as the rest of life is proceeding and I re-enter the story, I tend to re-enter the scenes with number 42. I just
resonates.
Yeah, I just love him. I just love him.
Same with 24, right? Because he kind of came out of the experience of John Doe 24, which you were very moved by.
Yes. And there's also, should I bring up what I said to you in the back room?
Yes,
there's
please.
also a literary allusion that he alludes to, that nobody has picked up on. And I don't know if I should tell it or let you guys perceive it yourselves, except nobody has. Not one person.
Can you give it like some
Hint?
Yeah.
His name. Homan. Okay, so what is the name Homan like? Thank you. Say it again, loud and proud. Homer. So Homan's.
Travel with that.
Yes.
Travel with that.
That's right.
See, somebody got it.
Woohoo! You guys are smart.
So this is where Rachel.
Delaware wins the gold star.
Yeah. First date.
It's true.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So there's a lot of parallels with his storyline and also with the text itself. And if you look very closely at the text, magnifying glass close, you'll see a lot of sailor allusions. It's true, I'm not making this up.
She's very gifted, isn't she? Now, when I also look at the cover of the book, I was actually very moved by this cover, and I shared that with you. I thought it was not only the story of a beautiful girl, but it shows a beautiful silhouette on the cover. Can you share with us how you chose this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to clarify that this is not the book. This is an advanced reader's copy, which is why some of you are sitting there going, I didn't know it was in paperback. It's not in paperback. An advanced reader's copy, which is also known as a galley, comes out 6 months before a book comes out, and it is uncorrected page proof, so you would hit typos. And they're bound and sent around for people to review and for situations like this to get set up in advance. So in fact, the book is hardback at this point. And in hardback, that cover is even more vivid, as some of you may have noticed, and the paper it's on is quite exquisite. And then I also have to clarify one other piece, which is how did I decide it? I had nothing to do with it. Writers have very little to do with the covers of their book. But this story is actually a good one. Of my 5 other books, I think three or four of the other covers, I can't even remember anymore. Those were not good stories, and they were struggles to get the cover changed from what it originally was supposed to be. But in this case, when my editor and I finished the edits, my editor said to me, and now we're going to design an iconic cover. That's actually what she said to me. No one has ever said such a thing, and I thought, yeah. And then I see this cover, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is not like anything else. This is an iconic cover. And where did that come from? I eventually found out the person who designed it had designed the cover for the New York Times Sunday magazine and put her heart and soul into it because she just loved the book so much. And so the cover has a lot of really interesting elements. The title is raised. The white paper is kind of opalescent, so it's not just black and white. The silhouette isn't just a silhouette. And if you open up the hardback, you'll also see the paper inside is red with the black silhouettes of feathers, and the spine has a red feather on it. And you may wonder if feathers have something to do with this story.
They do.
And they do. But we can't say because there's all these spoilers we're avoiding saying.
It is a love story.
But it is a love story. So I really love this cover, and people have already started. The book came out. What day? This is Monday. The book came out May 4th, and what is today's date? The 16th. So it hasn't yet been out 2 weeks, and I've had people posting online analyses of the cover, where they really look at it in terms of the story itself. Which is really quite amazing. And people saying, oh my God, what is, and I have a friend who, she rides the train to New York, and she's been carrying it on the train to New York so that people would pass by and go, what is that? And it's actually working. People are going, what is that? What is that? Yeah, so it really stands out, which I'm very happy about.
Well, and it fits.
Yeah.
It fits that story.
It really does. It's great. So I'm glad they didn't ask me what to do for the cover, because I would have been like, well, I don't know.
You did the hardest part.
But they have to package it, and I'm glad they did well by me.
It's a great story.
Thank you.
Package. You gave them a gift. Now, Riding the Bus with My Sister became a movie.
That's right.
I hope this one does too.
Thank you.
Do you have any interest in pursuing that?
Well, I don't pursue it. Someone will pursue me. And who that someone will be remains to be seen. Rosie O'Donnell parachuted into my life out of nowhere. And I expect something like that will happen again with this, because it's everyone who reads it. I mean, how many people in this room have actually read the book? Okay, wow, that's a lot. And how many of you think it's going to be a movie? Yeah, I mean, it's like, so we will see, but I want you all at the screening.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll definitely do it here.
And tell me, Rachel, because I think we're almost out of time, but I do believe we're going to open it up for Q&A with the audience. But tell me before we do that, when parents find out that they have a child with an intellectual disability, a common question is, what will my child's life be like? Will she or he ever be independent? Although they have disabilities, the characters in your book have a varying levels of independence at different points in their lives. How would you describe independence to the parent of a young child with an intellectual disability?
It's a great question. I talked to my father a lot about what it was like when Beth was born. And he said how he had to really get his mind around the fact that this wasn't going to be like what the first two kids were like, because Beth is the third. And that if he had advice to give to parents, he would say, this is a different ballgame, and you have to change your standards of measurement. And instead of looking at what can my child achieve, is my child going to become a lawyer or a doctor, you look at, is my child happy? And how do I help my child be happy? And I think that's when you switch it around, then it becomes something different. And the concept of independence isn't just, will they live on their own and drive a car and have a job and get married, though it may be those things. But it can be many other things depending on what that person can accomplish. Is my child going to be able to brush his teeth on his own? Is my child going to be able to go to school and get through a whole day on his own? Will my child need support for that? And how do I find the right support? And again, that gets back to the Kate character. Because to me, independence doesn't mean doing it alone. It may mean doing it with support, but doing it with confidence and happiness. So for Linny to be working with Kate is independence. And I think that's the thing, if a person with a disability, if they have that right person with them, supporting them, then truly happiness can be theirs.
That's great. That's great. Are there any final comments that you want to leave as the writer with your readers?
Yeah.
Well,
when you finish the book, don't tell anyone the ending. Okay? It has to be a secret. So we have been very careful with what we have said here, though those who haven't read the book don't realize that. But those who have read the book do realize that. So the book is filled with secrets, and when you have read it, you need to keep one as well. And I will have to trust that you will do that. And I guess the one other thing I can say is what Beth says to the drivers that she rides with, which is that they are cool. And the fact that you are here and you care about this and you care about these characters, I would like to say you are cool. So I thank you for coming.
And we thank you.